This is the disturbing cartel iceberg explained. Tier 1. The Guadalajara Cartel. It's April 1989 in Guadalajara, and police are bursting down the door of a house in a quiet neighborhood. Inside, they find a man with his family. Seconds later, they grab him, drag him into the street, and start ransacking the house. They don't seem to care that his kids are watching. The man being dragged out of the house is Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. And up until that moment, he controlled nearly every major drug trafficking route in Mexico. You might have heard the name Felix Gallardo. Drug lord, crime boss, all the usual nightmare stuff. What most people don't know is that he actually started out as a cop. He was a federal police officer who worked as a bodyguard for the governor of Sinaloa. The political connections he built during that time became the foundation of everything that came after. By 1980, Felix Gallardo had united Mexico's biggest drug traffickers under one operation. He split the U.S.-Mexico border into sections called plazas, assigned each to a trusted lieutenant, and skimmed a cut from everything moving through. That organization became the Guadalajara Cartel, and at its peak, it was raking in an estimated $5 billion per year. Things ran smoothly until 1985. When his cartel made a mistake no government connection could fix. They kidnapped an undercover DEA agent, Enrique Kiki Camarena, who had been poking around their operations. That murder sparked massive U.S. pressure on the Mexican government. Felix's partners, Rafael Caro Quintero and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, were arrested first. Gallardo managed to stay free for 4 more years, leaning on government allies. But by 1989, even they had washed their hands of it. Most people figured the organization would collapse once Felix Gallardo went down, but it didn't. He reportedly gave his lawyer instructions from prison to divide up the border plazas among his former lieutenants. Those factions grew into the cartels that would tear Mexico apart for the next 3 decades. As for Felix himself, he was sentenced to 40 years, and then got another 37 in a 2017 retrial. He's been behind bars since 1989. As of 2026, he's still there. 80 years old, partially paralyzed, blind in one eye, and deaf in one ear. El Chapo and the Sinaloa Cartel. In 2013, the Chicago Crime Commission brought back a title it hadn't used since the 1930s, Public Enemy Number 1. The last person to get it was Al Capone. This time, it went to Joaquin Guzman, a man who, just to be clear, didn't even live in Chicago. He never needed to. His product was already there, sitting comfortably in every corner of the city. El Chapo started out in the mountains of Sinaloa, poor, like most guys who end up in this line of work. He got into the drug trade early and leaned under the Guadalajara Cartel. When its boss, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, got arrested in 1989, the whole operation got chopped up and handed out to different lieutenants. El Chapo ended with a Pacific corridor. At the time, it wasn't exactly the winning lottery ticket, but then he started building. El Chapo built his operation by solving problems in ways other traffickers hadn't thought through. He expanded the use of underground tunnels across the U.S. border. And these weren't just holes in the ground. Some had rail systems, lighting, and ventilation. He hid cocaine in chili pepper cans and sent them by train. He moved drugs with submarines, fishing boats, and private planes. And while everyone else was busy threatening people, he spent just as much time paying them off. Police, judges, soldiers, politicians. If you could be bribed, you were probably already on the list. By the early 2000s, the Sinaloa cartel had spread into more than 50 countries. U.S. intelligence later called it the most powerful drug trafficking operation in the world, even bigger than the Medellín cartel at its peak. Between 1990 and 2008, they moved nearly 200 tons of cocaine into the U.S., plus everything else you can imagine. And while all this was going on, El Chapo had a side hobby, not staying in prison. He got arrested in 1993. Then in 2001, he rolled out of prison in a laundry cart. He got caught again in 2014, escaped again in 2015. But this time, he didn't stay a free man for long. In 2016, he was captured for good, extradited to the United States in 2017, and sentenced to life plus 30 years. But the cartel didn't go down with him. Control passed to Ismael El Mayo Zambada and El Chapo's sons, known as the Chapitos. They kept the operation running and pushed it into new territory, especially fentanyl, which turned out to be very profitable and very destructive. Then, because these stories never end quietly, things started falling apart. In July 2024, El Mayo was arrested after one of the Chapitos allegedly tricked him onto a plane that landed in U.S. custody. That move split the cartel straight down the middle. Now, instead of one organization running like a machine, you have factions fighting each other across multiple states. Turns out building an empire is one thing. Keeping it together is a completely different problem. Guadalajara Airport Shootout, 1993. You're a taxi driver sitting in your car in the Guadalajara Airport parking lot on May 24, 1993. Just killing time between fares. Everything feels normal until gunfire cuts through the noise. At first, you freeze. Then people start running. You look up, and that's when you see them. Men with automatic weapons firing into a white car less than 50 feet away. By the early 1990s, the Sinaloa Cartel and the Tijuana Cartel were locked in an all-out war. The Arellano Felix brothers ran Tijuana. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman ran Sinaloa, and both sides were fighting to get control of the most valuable smuggling routes into the United States. In November 1992, the Sinaloa side sent 40 gunmen to shoot up a Tijuana cartel party in Puerto Vallarta and killed 9 people. The Arellano Felix brothers barely made it out alive, and after that, revenge was the only thing on their minds. So on May 24, 1993, when word got out that El Chapo would be at Guadalajara Airport to catch a flight, the Arellano Felix brothers sent around 15 gunmen to take him out. They showed up armed with automatic weapons, spotted a white Mercury Grand Marquis in the parking lot, the same model El Chapo was known to use, and opened fire. The problem was, the man inside that car wasn't El Chapo. It was Cardinal Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo, the Archbishop of Guadalajara, and one of the highest-ranking Catholic officials in Mexico. The forensic report later showed the Cardinal was hit 14 times at close range, less than 3 feet away. His driver was shot 11 times. Both died on the spot. So they ended up killing one of the most important religious figures in the country. And somehow, the person they were actually there for still got away. El Chapo had been in the same parking lot the whole time, just in a different car. In the middle of the chaos, he slipped out and left in a taxi. The gunmen got away too. A commercial flight to Tijuana had been held on the runway just for them, and they walked straight onto it while the airport was still in chaos. When the plane touched down, police and military were waiting, fully armed and fully aware of what had happened. And yet, against all odds, they just walked away. To this day, nobody's been convicted for the Cardinal's murder. The case has been reopened and reinvestigated over and over, and each time it just leaves more questions than answers. Pablo Escobar and the Medellín Cartel. In 1981, a man took a family photo in front of the White House in Washington, D.C. He was in a white shirt, standing next to his young son, looking like any other tourist. On that same trip, he and his family went to Disney World, and everything seemed like a pretty normal vacation. Except the man in the photo is Pablo Escobar. And at the time it was taken, he was already one of the biggest drug traffickers on the planet. Escobar was born in 1949 in Rio Negro, just outside Medellín, Colombia. He grew up in a working-class household and got involved in petty crime in his early 20s. Smuggling, stealing cars, cocaine changed everything. By the 1970s, U.S. demand was exploding, and Escobar recognized it as a business opportunity. He built labs, supply lines, and smuggling routes, eventually creating the Medellín Cartel, which would become the most powerful cocaine operation the world had ever seen. At its peak, Escobar's cartel was moving around 15 tons of cocaine into the U.S. every single day. He pulled in roughly $420 million a week and made Forbes' billionaire list for 7 years straight. The money came in so fast it became a problem. His brother, Roberto, who was responsible for handling cartel finances, spent $2,500 a month on rubber bands. Billions were lost each year to mold, water, and rats chewing through stacks of cash in hidden warehouses. But it didn't matter. For Escobar, money was a means to an end. When his family was hiding in the mountains and his daughter Manuela got cold, he grabbed $2 million in cash and burned it to keep her warm. Most people struggled to pay their heating bills. Escobar just burned a couple million in cash like kindling. Keeping the empire together meant violence and bribery in equal measure. His motto, plata o plomo, silver or lead, meant take the bribe or take a bullet. Judges, politicians, police, journalists, everyone got the same choice. Those who refused ended up dead. Medellín alone saw over 3,500 people killed by his cartel, including 3 presidential candidates and hundreds of police officers. Then came La Catedral. In 1991, Escobar negotiated his surrender, but only under one condition. He got to build his own prison. A mountaintop fortress with a view, a soccer field, a jacuzzi, a bar, a disco, and a giant dollhouse for his daughter. He chose the guards, threw parties, and kept running the cartel from the inside. When the government tried to move him after a dispute over murdered men, he walked out through a weak wall he had built for that exact purpose. He literally escaped from his own prison because he knew how. 2 years later, it all caught up with him. On December 2, 1993, one day after his 44th birthday, Colombian forces, backed by U.S. intelligence, tracked him to a rooftop in Medellín. Escobar was shot dead. Tier 2. The murder of DEA agent Kiki Camarena. It's a Thursday afternoon in February 1985. You're a DEA agent standing outside the U.S. consulate in Guadalajara, waiting for your colleague. He said he'd meet you at the car 10 minutes ago. He doesn't show. So you head back inside and ask around. Someone tells you he already walked out, but 4 men in plain clothes were waiting for him. They grabbed him, forced him into a car, and drove off. In a city where the Guadalajara Cartel had most of the police on payroll, nobody stepped in, and nobody reported it. The man taken that day was Enrique Kiki Camarena. He'd spent 4 years in Guadalajara as an undercover DEA agent, building cases against one of the most powerful drug networks in Mexico. The Guadalajara Cartel, led by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, along with Rafael Caro Quintero and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, controlled a huge share of the drugs moving into the United States. They operated with help from Mexico's Federal Security Directorate, which provided protection and cover in exchange for bribes. It was a convenient setup. Camarena knew the risks and kept going anyway. Over time, he built a network of informants and gathered enough intelligence to expose a massive marijuana plantation in Chihuahua called Rancho Buffalo. The place covered more than 2,500 acres and was worth around $8 billion. When it was destroyed, it took a serious chunk out of the cartel's business and embarrassed Felix Gallardo in front of his own people. He didn't like that. So on February 7, 1985, cartel-connected police officers picked Camarena up outside the consulate. Around the same time, they also took his pilot, Alfredo Zavala, who had been flying surveillance missions for the DEA. Both men were brought to a house owned by Caro Quintero, where they were held for about 30 hours and tortured for information. Names, operations, how much the Americans knew, everything they could get. Camarena was beaten with a metal bar until his ribs were broken, and his skull and windpipe were crushed. They drilled into his head and used electric shocks to keep the pain going. When he started slipping out of consciousness, a doctor was brought in to keep him alive so the questioning could continue. Zavala was held nearby and went through the same treatment. Camarena died on February 9. About a month later, his body and Zavala's were found buried in a ranch in Michoacan, both showing clear signs of prolonged torture. When the U.S. government got the news, they didn't take it lightly. There was serious pressure on Mexico and talks of shutting down the border entirely. Mexico responded with a manhunt. Caro Quintero was caught in Costa Rica within months, along with Fonseca Carrillo. Felix Gallardo managed to stay free a bit longer, but he was arrested in 1989. Cartel recruitment of child soldiers. It's December 2010 at the Cuernavaca airport. A 14-year-old boy is standing in line for a flight to San Diego. He's quiet, alone, looks like any other kid. But when the security officers pull him aside, they quickly realize he isn't just any kid. He's one of the most notorious criminals in Mexico. His name was Edgar Jimenez Lugo, known by the nickname El Ponchis. He was born in San Diego, making him a U.S. citizen. But after his parents separated and his grandmother died, he ended up living on his own near Cuernavaca with no school, no income, and nobody watching over him. That made him exactly the kind of person a cartel recruiter could walk up to without anyone asking questions. The South Pacific Cartel got to him when he was 11. They gave him a job, money, and something that felt like a family. And in return, he did whatever they asked. By the time he was arrested at that airport, he had confessed to killing 4 people, and authorities had linked him to dozens more deaths in the area. Because Mexican law caps how long a minor can be locked up, regardless of what they've done, the maximum sentence the court could hand him was 3 years. He served it, got deported to Texas, and was walking around free at 17. Edgar's case made international headlines, but he wasn't even close to being the only one. Around the same time, 2 American teenagers from Laredo, Texas, named Rosalia Retta and Gabriel Cardona, were working as contract killers for Los Zetas just across the border. Retta was recruited at 13 after being taken to a ranch where Z40 one of the most feared Zetas leaders, put a gun in his hand and told him to shoot a man who was tied up on the ground. Over the next 4 years, he says he killed over 30 people, earning up to $50,000 per hit. Cardona joined at 16 and became one of the Zetas' go-to assassins for high-priority targets. He tattooed eyeballs on his eyelids, so he'd look awake even when he was sleeping, which tells you everything you need to know about the kind of world these kids were living in. Both of them are now serving life sentences in Texas. Cartels have been pulling children into their operations for decades, and they do it because the system practically rewards it. Kids as young as 9 get brought in as lookouts, watching corners and reporting back to handlers. By 12, they're guarding safe houses. By 16, they're kidnapping, extorting, and killing. The U.S. Bureau of International Labor Affairs estimated that around 30,000 children were actively working for cartels in Mexico, with another 200,000 at risk of being recruited. The ones who survive long enough to get arrested usually receive sentences that wouldn't even cover the number of people they've killed. The ones who don't survive just get replaced. Sadly, the cartels never run out of recruits, because Mexico is yet to run out of kids with nothing to lose. The Culiacánazos. You're stuck in traffic in Culiacán on October 17, 2019. Everything feels normal until gunfire shatters the peace. Within minutes, pickup trucks full of armed men are rolling through the streets, and burning vehicles are blocking the roads in every direction. What triggered all of this was a single arrest. That afternoon, a convoy of 35 soldiers and police officers rolled into a house in Culiacán's Tres Rios neighborhood, looking for one man, Ovidio Guzman Lopez, one of El Chapo's sons and a major U.S. target. By around 3 o'clock p.m., they had him. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Within minutes, roughly 700 cartel gunmen flooded the city. They stole over 50 vehicles off the streets, set them on fire, and used them as roadblocks to cut off any military reinforcements from entering the city. Snipers took up positions on rooftops, while armed men in tactical gear moved through the streets, pointing rifles at anyone who got too close. And that was just one part of what was happening. Across town, cartel gunmen stormed a military housing complex called 21 de Marzo, where soldiers' wives and children lived. They burst into 4 apartments, fired into the air, and threw in 2 hand grenades. One soldier was taken hostage in front of his children, and 8 soldiers were captured in total. The message was simple: give Ovidio back, or the hostages and their families would die. In the end, the Mexican government gave in. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador made the call to release Ovidio, later telling the press, "You can't fight fire with fire." It took 3 more years, but authorities came back for him. On January 5, 2023, Ovidio was arrested again. This time, the authorities came with military helicopters, armored vehicles, and enough firepower to make it clear they weren't leaving empty-handed. The cartel responded the same way as before, storming the streets, burning vehicles, and blocking roads. They even attacked Culiacán's airport, where a stray bullet hit an Aeromexico plane sitting on the runway. 30 people were killed, including 10 military personnel. This time, though, the government didn't budge. Ovidio was eventually transferred to the United States to stand trial, where he pleaded guilty to drug trafficking charges in July 2025. He's currently cooperating with federal prosecutors and is awaiting sentencing. Tier 3. El Pirata de Culiacán. You're in a crowded bar in Zapopan, Mexico. Music's blasting, drinks are flowing, and everybody is filming something for social media. Then a black truck pulls up outside. A few men step out with long guns, walk straight through the entrance, and head directly toward one table. Moments later, they open fire. The person they're there for is a 17-year-old influencer. His name is Juan Luis Lagunas Rosales, but the internet knew him as El Pirata de Culiacán. And a year before that night, he was just a kid washing cars on the street. He was born in April 2000 in Navolato, Sinaloa. His father left before he was born, and his mother handed him over to his grandmother. By 15, he had dropped out of school and moved to Culiacán to get by however he could. That mostly meant washing cars and hanging around people who didn't mind handing a teenager alcohol. That's where the videos started. He filmed himself drinking at parties, chugging bottles, slurring his words, and falling over while everyone around him laughed and kept recording. One video blew up, then another. And suddenly, this kid with a drawn-on beard and zero filter had over 1 million followers on Facebook and hundreds of thousands on Instagram. The attention brought new opportunities, and also new people. Music groups that glorified cartel culture started putting him in their videos. Club owners paid him to show up and drink on camera. His social media filled up with photos of guns, luxury cars, and women that weren't his but looked good enough online. He leaned into it, kept the fake beard, added more tattoos, and played the role like it was real. He was 17, but no one seemed to care. The adults around him didn't slow things down either. They just handed him another bottle and hit record. Then, sometime in late 2017, at another party, already drunk, he looked into a camera and did this. If you don't speak Spanish, all you need to know is he was hurling insults at Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. And that's not a name you throw around lightly. At the time, Cervantes, popularly known as El Mencho, was running the Jalisco New Generation Cartel and was one of the most wanted men in Mexico and the United States. The clip of Rosales running his mouth spread fast, and this time it reached people who weren't watching for entertainment. About a month later, on December 18, 2017, Rosales posted that he'd be at Menta 2 Cantaros that night. He even gave the exact time. So when those men walked into the bar, they didn't have to look for him. They went straight to him and shot him 15 times. Authorities later looked into possible involvement from the CJNG, but never confirmed anything publicly, and no arrests were ever made. His body sat in a morgue in Guadalajara for days before anyone came to claim it. On the streets, though, people were already pointing fingers at El Mencho and his crew, because in that world, you don't disrespect the boss and just walk away. After Rosales, whoever was responsible, especially if it was the CJNG, went right back to business as usual, until a few years later, in February 2026, El Mencho himself was killed after being wounded during a military raid on his hideout in Tapalpa, Jalisco. He died while being airlifted to Mexico City. The 43 Ayotzinapa Students. It's the evening of September 26, 2014. And you're a college student on a bus with your classmates in Iguala. You're from Ayotzinapa Rural Teachers College in Tixtla, Guerrero. And the plan is simple. Grab a few buses and head to Mexico City for a protest. Students from your school have done this for years, so nobody's expecting problems. But around 9:30 p.m., police block the roads and start shooting. Every year, Ayotzinapa students travel to Mexico City to mark the anniversary of the 1968 Tlatelolco Massacre. Getting there usually meant commandeering buses from local stations, and that's exactly what they were doing when Iguala police intercepted them. The students had actually tried reaching the state capital, Chilpanchingo, first, but state and federal authorities blocked those routes. So they rerouted to Iguala to raise transportation money and grab buses for the nearby 300-kilometer trip. Now, what happened next depends entirely on who you believe. Police say the students hijacked 3 buses and tried to speed off, so officers chased them down and opened fire. The student union tells a completely different story. They say they'd been protesting and hitchhiking when police just attacked them. Either way, 2 students died on one of the buses, and others scrambled into the surrounding hills. In a separate incident, unidentified gunmen shot up a bus carrying a local soccer team, possibly because they mistook it for one of the student buses. Bullets hit the bus and 2 nearby taxis, killing the bus driver, a football player, and a woman sitting in one of the taxis. So these guys managed to murder a bunch of people who had absolutely nothing to do with anything. The next morning, authorities found the body of a student, Julio Cesar Mondragon, who tried to run during the gunfire. He'd been tortured before dying of severe brain injuries. In total, 6 people died and at least 25 were injured. But that's only a part of it. During the chaos, dozens of students were abducted. Witnesses say police forced them into patrol vehicles and drove them away. After that night, they were never seen again. The government's initial story, presented by Attorney General Jesus Murillo Caram, claimed that the police handed the students over to a local drug gang called Guerreros Unidos. According to him, the gang killed them, burned their bodies at a garbage dump in the nearby town of Cocula, and tossed the ashes into a river. But forensic experts examined the site and said the evidence didn't support that theory at all. An independent panel of investigators later concluded that Mexican security forces at the local, state, and federal levels had all worked together to make the students disappear. They believe the students had unknowingly grabbed the bus that Guerreros Unidos was using to smuggle heroin to Chicago. One of the 5 buses involved that night was left out of the official investigation, and the panel believed it may have been carrying hidden drugs or cash. The mayor of Iguala, Jose Luis Abarca, whose wife had direct ties to Guerreros Unidos, reportedly ordered the police to stop the students, and they did. The couple fled the city after the incident, and were found hiding in a house in Mexico City about 6 weeks later. Abarca was eventually cleared of any involvement in the student's disappearance in 2022 due to insufficient evidence. But he's now in a maximum security prison, serving 112 years for kidnapping and murder in separate cases. Over a decade later, only 3 of the 43 students have ever been identified through tiny bone fragments. The other 40 are still missing. The Uruapan Nightclub Statement. It's September 2006 in Uruapan, Mexico. The nightclub Sol y Sombra is packed with partygoers when a group of masked men suddenly burst through the doors. They fire shots into the air and order everyone to the ground. For a second, it looks like a robbery, but it isn't. It's something far worse. To understand what happened next, you have to go back a few years. In the early 2000s, a group called Los Zetas, the military-trained enforcers of the Gulf Cartel, were expanding across Michoacan. They shook down farmers and businesses, kidnapped civilians for ransom, and turned the state into their own personal playground. Eventually, some local traffickers decided they'd had enough. They had originally trained alongside the Zetas and worked under their structure, but the relationship had gone sour. These men formed their own group under a man named Nazario Moreno Gonzalez. Moreno even wrote a spiritual handbook for his followers, blending evangelical Christianity with drug trafficking. They called themselves La Familia Michoacana, and their goal was simple: kick the Zetas out of their state. By September 2006, they were ready to make a statement. The day before the nightclub attack, La Familia kidnapped 5 men from a local mechanic's shop. These men were suspected of having ties to rival operations. According to investigators, they were tied up while still conscious, decapitated with large knives, and their heads were bagged, saved for what came next. Inside the nightclub, after the gunmen forced everyone to the ground, they rolled the severed heads across the dance floor. A handwritten note was left nearby, and it read, "The family doesn't kill for money. It doesn't kill women. It doesn't kill innocent people. Only those who deserve to die, die. Know that this is divine justice." Just like that, La Familia Michoacana, a cartel that hardly anyone outside Michoacan has heard of, announced itself to the country. And the message wasn't just for the Zetas. It was for every cartel, every cop, every government official in the region. Michoacan was theirs now, and anyone who disagreed was invited to test that. The 2019 Uruapan Bridge Display. It's August 8th, 2019, just after 5:30 a.m., and you're driving through Uruapan, half awake, heading to work, when you see something hanging from the overpass ahead. At first, your brain struggled to make sense of what's in front of you. Then it clicks. There are 9 dead bodies, strung up above the road. Some are bound, others are half naked, and there's a banner beside them telling everyone to carry on like this is normal. The message was signed by the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG, one of the most aggressive criminal groups in Mexico. They had formed around 2010 after breaking away from the Sinaloa Cartel, and over the next decade, they expanded fast. By 2019, CJNG was running operations across multiple states and in more than 40 countries. What happened at Uruapan was their way of making it clear that Michoacan was next. And they didn't stop at the overpass. Within minutes, officers found 7 more bodies under a nearby pedestrian bridge. 6 men and 1 woman. Then, further down the same boulevard, 3 more bodies were discovered, cut apart and scattered across the street. In total, there were 19 victims, and all of them had been shot before their bodies were arranged across the city. The banner left by CJNG named specific rivals from a group called Los Viagras, a gang affiliated with La Familia Michoacana, and warned that anyone who helped them would end up the same way. But here's the thing. When authorities started identifying the victims, they realized they weren't cartel soldiers or drug traffickers at all. Among the 19 dead were a law intern, a waiter, a locksmith, and a housewife. Just regular people whose only apparent crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The next day, 14 people were arrested in Silao, including 2 minors in connection with the massacre. Tier 4, the San Fernando Massacre. It's August 2010, and you're one of dozens of undocumented migrants packed into a bus heading north through Mexico, about 100 miles from the U.S. border. As you and the group settle in for another stretch of the journey, 3 trucks surround your vehicle, and about 8 heavily armed men step out. Within minutes, you're all blindfolded, forced into the back of a truck, and driven to a ranch in the middle of nowhere. The ranch is in San Fernando, Tamaulipas, deep in Los Zetas territory. The cartel has a routine: intercept migrants, rob them, hold them for ransom, or force them to work as drug runners or foot soldiers. That night, 58 men and 14 women, mostly from Central and South America, all just trying to reach the U.S., found themselves at the mercy of the Zetas. First, the cartel demanded ransom, but nobody could pay. Then they were ordered to haul drugs and kill rivals. They refused. So the Zetas lined them up against the wall, one by one, put them on their knees, and shot them in the back of the head. Then their bodies were piled on top of each other and left in the warehouse. But one of the victims survived, an 18-year-old from Ecuador named Luis Freddy Lala Pomavilla. He was shot in the neck, but the bullet didn't kill him. He lay still, pretending to be dead, and waited until the gunmen left the warehouse. With a gunshot wound in the neck, he managed to walk for miles through the countryside until he reached a military checkpoint, where he told Mexican Marines what had happened. The Marines sent helicopters to the ranch, and once the area was secured, they entered the warehouse and found 72 bodies. Some still slumped in the chairs where they'd been shot. After the massacre, the lead investigator assigned to the case, a state prosecutor named Roberto Juarez Vasquez, disappeared just one day after the bodies were discovered. His body was later found in a field about 30 miles from San Fernando, alongside the body of a local police chief who had also been working the case. Apparently, investigating a cartel massacre in Tamaulipas was just as dangerous as being caught in one. The man eventually identified as the main orchestrator of the killings, Edgar Huerta Montiel, was a former soldier who had deserted the Mexican army to join Los Zetas. After his capture in 2011, he confessed to personally killing 10 of the migrants and admitted that more than 600 bodies were buried in mass graves near San Fernando. Casino Royale Monterrey attack. It's a Thursday afternoon in August 2011 in Monterrey, one of Mexico's largest and wealthiest cities. You're inside a casino called Casino Royale, playing the tables alongside about 80 other people. Suddenly, 4 vehicles pull up outside, and a group of armed men with covered faces burst through the front entrance. They fire shots, scream at everyone to get out, and start splashing gasoline across the floor. Before most people can even process what's happening, the building is on fire. Monterrey had been a symbol of Mexico's economic progress for years, a city known for business, industry, and wealth rather than cartel violence. But that changed around 2010, when the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas turned on each other. The Gulf Cartel had controlled drug trafficking in northeastern Mexico for decades, and Los Zetas, who were originally formed by deserters from Mexico's elite military special forces, had served as their enforcement arm. After the Gulf Cartel's leader, Ociel Cardenas Guillen, was arrested and sent to the U.S., the Zetas quickly became more powerful than the organization they were supposed to protect. They had more men, more money, and more territory, and their leader believed they should be running the whole operation. The Gulf Cartel tried to rein them in, but by early 2010, the Zetas had broken off completely. From that point on, both sides waged war over smuggling routes and territory across northeastern Mexico, and Monterrey ended up right in the crossfire. By 2011, the city was seeing public shootings, bodies left on bridges, and attacks on bars and nightclubs. The Casino Royale wasn't even the first casino to be hit. 2 others owned by Grupo Royale had already been attacked earlier that year. Nobody died in those incidents, and the casinos stayed open. Investigators later revealed that the attacks were part of an extortion campaign. The Zetas were forcing businesses to pay for protection and burning down the ones that refused. The attack on August 25th was different from the first 2. Around a dozen members of Los Zetas arrived at the casino just before 4 p.m. Surveillance footage showed them pulling up in vehicles, calmly stepping out and entering the building. Once inside, they opened fire and poured gasoline across the entrances. The whole thing took less than 3 minutes. People who heard the shots and smelled the smoke tried to run, but in the panic, many went deeper into the building, and the fire eventually cut off their way out. The smoke filled the building fast, and the second story eventually collapsed. And by the time emergency crews broke through the walls to reach the people trapped inside, 52 people were dead. The majority of them were women, and 1 was pregnant. In the days that followed, police managed to track down and arrest 19 people connected to the attack. Several of them confessed that the whole thing was supposed to be an intimidation job, just a scare tactic to get the casino owners to pay up. But things got out of hand. President Calderon declared 3 days of national mourning, called it an act of terrorism, and sent 3,000 soldiers and federal police into Monterrey. The government cracked down hard on the Zetas in the months that followed. Several of the people directly involved in the attack were arrested or killed, including the alleged third-in-command who ordered the Casino Royale attack, the Apodaca prison massacre. It's just after 1 a.m. on a Sunday in February 2012, and you're an inmate at Apodaca prison, about 30 kilometers north of Monterrey. You're asleep in cell block D with roughly 750 other prisoners, most of them Gulf Cartel members, when suddenly the doors swing open. Men rush in, armed with knives, sharpened metal, and pipes. This was the nightmare that dozens of Gulf Cartel inmates faced on February 19, 2012. Apodaca was built for roughly 1,500 inmates, but by the time of this incident, it was crammed with roughly 3,000. Like most Mexican state prisons, it was overcrowded, underfunded, and essentially run by the inmates themselves. Each cell block was basically cartel territory. Rival factions were supposed to be kept apart, but that rarely worked. Guards were bribed, threatened, or both, and the cartels ran the prison just like they ran the streets outside. Inside Apodaca, the main players were Los Zetas and the Gulf Cartel. They were at war, and being trapped in the same building only made things worse. In the early hours of February 19, the Zetas made their move. Surveillance footage later showed 2 inmates using keys to unlock doors between cell blocks, keys they could only have gotten from the guards. Once the doors were open, Zetas poured from cell block C into cell block D, where Gulf Cartel members were sleeping, and attacked with shanks, pipes, and anything else they could grab. No firearms were used. It was all brutal, close-range violence executed quickly and as quietly as possible. Meanwhile, Zetas who didn't join the attack covered security cameras and set mattresses on fire to create chaos. While all of this was happening, another group of about 30 Zetas, led by a man named Oscar Manuel Bernal, made their way to one of the prison's guard towers. And from there, they lowered themselves to the ground, where vehicles were waiting outside to pick them up. No walls were breached. No armed group stormed in from the outside. Yet about 30 prisoners managed to walk free. According to investigators, the prison director and security chief helped coordinate the whole thing. By the time they called the army and federal police for help, it was 3:15 a.m., more than 2 hours after the chaos began. That's a long time to wait before calling for backup during a massacre. When the dust finally settled, 44 inmates were dead, all of them Gulf Cartel members. 12 more were injured, and at least 37 Zetas escaped, including several high-ranking leaders. The massacre was just an elaborate distraction so these guys could walk out the door. After the massacre, the prison director and 28 staff members were arrested. Investigators soon discovered that the Zetas had basically been running Apodaca like it was their own property for years. A recaptured inmate later told authorities that guards let them throw parties, sell drugs to other prisoners, and even walk out unsupervised to carry out hits on the streets. The Durango mass graves. It's a regular weekday morning in Durango, a city of about 600,000 people in northwestern Mexico. Kids are walking to school, shops are opening up, and everything seems normal. All of a sudden, soldiers show up and start digging in the empty lot down the street, and within hours, they're pulling bodies out of the ground. That empty lot was just the beginning. Starting in April 2011, grave after grave kept turning up across the city, and over the following months, 7 mass graves were uncovered in total. All of them were in middle-class neighborhoods, within walking distance of homes, schools, and shops. Some bodies had been buried less than 6 months, others over 4 years, and people had been living their lives yards away without knowing. Investigators linked the graves to an internal war within the Sinaloa Cartel. A subgroup called the M's, loyal to El Chapo, was fighting 2 breakaway factions, the Canelos and the Cabreras, over control of Durango's smuggling routes. The Sinaloa Cartel had always been seen as the most organized and stable of Mexico's criminal groups, but what was happening underneath Durango's streets told a very different story. The breakaway factions were killing rivals and burying them wherever they could find space. Anywhere they could dig a hole without drawing attention was the perfect spot. By the time the digging was done, the body count was reaching close to 500. Most of the dead were never identified at all, partly because investigators used backhoes to dig up remains, and the machines destroyed bodies in the process, making DNA identification nearly impossible. Durango was far from the only place where this was happening. Around the same time, nearly 200 bodies were pulled from mass graves in San Fernando, Tamaulipas. Dozens more were found in Chihuahua, Jalisco, and Veracruz. And by 2016, investigators had documented nearly 2,000 secret graves across 24 Mexican states. Tier 5. El Pozolero, the man who dissolved 300 bodies in acid. On the outskirts of Tijuana, a man stands over a 200-liter drum, slowly stirring its contents with a long stick. The drum sits on a gas burner and has been heating for hours. He keeps at it for nearly 8 hours, making sure there's almost nothing left. By the end, all that remains are a few teeth, some fingernails, and small bone fragments. He burns what he can, buries the rest, and waits for the next delivery. His name is Santiago Meza Lopez, and you'd think he was a cartel enforcer, hitman, or something like that. But he wasn't. Meza started out as a construction worker, doing odd jobs for the Arellano Felix organization, the family that ran the Tijuana cartel. He started working for them in the mid-1990s. In 1996, two cartel members pulled him aside and showed him something. They had a drum filled with water and caustic soda, a chemical compound normally used in industrial cleaning, and they dropped a leg of beef into it. Within about 2 hours, the meat had completely broken down. 6 months later, they called him back and told him the cartel wanted him to do the same thing, but with human bodies. Meza said he didn't want to do it, but the cartel wasn't asking, so he learned the process. The bodies had to be cut into pieces, lowered into the drum with the same mixture of water and caustic soda, and heated on a gas burner for hours until almost nothing was left. Over the next 13 years, Meza walked across at least 10 different locations in and around Tijuana, helping the cartel dissolve human bodies. One of the most frequently used sites was a rural property outside the city that became known as the Chicken Coop, where he estimated that around 70 bodies were processed during his time there. By the time Meza was arrested in January 2009, he confessed to dissolving at least 300 corpses, which is horrifying enough. But Unidos por los Desaparecidos de Baja California, an organization representing families of missing people, has since recovered roughly 16,500 liters of organic matter from the sites where he worked. That number suggests the real toll could easily exceed 1,000 victims. The people whose bodies he dissolved were mostly cartel rivals and kidnap victims taken by the Arellano Felix and Sinaloa organizations. But despite the nature of what he did, Meza was clear about one thing when he was arrested. He said he had never personally killed any of them. Bodies were delivered to him already dead, and his job was to make them disappear. Authorities later give him the nickname El Pozolero, meaning the stew maker, a reference to traditional Mexican soup. Meza was sentenced to 10 years in prison in 2012, not for dissolving 300 human bodies, but for ties to organized crime. At the time, Mexican law only considered destroying human remains forbidden burial, which wasn't treated as a serious offense. He later got an additional 30 years tacked on for kidnapping. As of 2026, he's 71 years old and still behind bars. Z40's Guiso method. Imagine you get a phone call telling you to come to a meeting. You don't really have a choice because the person on the other end of the line is one of the most powerful men in Mexico. And ignoring him isn't something people get to do twice. When you arrive, there's no meeting. Just armed men, a 55-gallon oil drum, and a can of gasoline. That's what it was like to cross paths with Miguel Angel Trevino Morales, better known as Z40, the man who turned Los Zetas from a feared cartel into something far more horrific. Trevino Morales didn't come from the military, like most of the original Zetas. He started as a teenager in Nuevo Laredo, washing cars and running errands for a local street gang called Los Tejas. From there, he moved into small-time smuggling, and his fluent English and knowledge of both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border made him useful. The Gulf Cartel hired him in the late 1990s, and when they created Los Zetas as their enforcement arm, Trevino became one of their most effective operators despite having no military training at all. By 2005, he'd been given control of the Nuevo Laredo drug territory, one of the most valuable smuggling corridors in all of Mexico. And when the Zetas split from the Gulf Cartel in 2010, Trevino had already been named their national commander, meaning every operation the Zetas ran across Mexico went through him. Eventually, after the Zetas' original leader, Heriberto Lazcano, was killed by Mexican Marines in October 2012, Trevino took over the entire organization. As Trevino Morales rose through the ranks, he needed ways to keep rivals, informants, and anyone thinking of stepping out of line under control. Los Zetas already had a reputation for extreme violence, but even by their standards, he stood out. He developed a method known as El Guiso, or the stew. He'd have his men stuff the victim into a 55-gallon oil drum, soak them in gasoline or diesel, and set them on fire while they were still alive. Those who didn't get the drum treatment were beaten with wooden planks or had their body parts cut off while they were still conscious. That level of brutality made him one of the most wanted men in both Mexico and the United States. The Mexican government put a $2.3 million bounty on his head, and the U.S. added another $5 million. In July 2013, Mexican Marines who had been tracking Trevino Morales intercepted his pickup truck on a dirt road outside Nuevo Laredo with the help of a helicopter. Inside, they found him with a bodyguard, an accountant, $2 million in cash, and 8 guns. He tried to run, but he didn't get very far. He was taken into custody, and in 2025, he was extradited to the United States. Los Zetas forced gladiator fights. You're on a bus heading north through Tamaulipas, a state in northeastern Mexico near the Texas border. The bus slows, and up ahead, what looks like a military checkpoint appears. Men in uniform wave you over, and before anyone can process it, they storm the bus, separate the passengers, and start dragging people off. For hundreds of travelers on Highway 101 in early 2011, that moment would be the last time anything felt normal, because the people pulling them off the bus were members of Los Zetas. By 2011, Los Zetas was locked in a brutal territorial war with the Gulf Cartel across northeastern Mexico, and they were burning through foot soldiers fast. They needed replacements, so they came up with a method for finding them. Zetas members would set up fake military checkpoints along the highway, stop passenger buses, and drag people off. The elderly were killed on the spot, women were separated and assaulted, and the able-bodied men were taken to ranches in the arena. At the ranches, the men were stripped naked, paired up, and handed crude weapons, things like hammers, machetes, bricks, and wooden planks. Then they were told to fight each other to the death. The Zetas called the game who's going to be the next hitman. The men who survived were pulled out, congratulated, and told they were now members of Los Zetas. Afterward, they were sent out on dangerous missions to attack rival cartel positions in nearby towns. They had little training, no backup, and almost no chance of making it back alive. If they refused to do as they were told, they were killed. If they tried to run, they were killed. The whole system was designed to filter out anyone who hesitated, and kept only the ones willing to do whatever it took to stay alive. This all came to light as part of the investigation into the 2011 San Fernando Massacre. When authorities started digging up mass graves in the area, they found 193 bodies buried across 47 sites. Most of the victims had blunt force injuries, matching the weapons witnesses said were used during the gladiator fights. One of the arrested Zetas leaders, Edgar Huerta Montiel, shed more light on how the system actually worked. He confessed that the captive bus passengers were taken to safe houses and tortured. He described it as some kind of inquisition, where the Zetas scanned their phones and text messages looking for ties to the Gulf Cartel. Anyone they suspected of being connected was killed. Anyone they couldn't link to a rival group would be made to fight as gladiators. And if they survived, well, you know how it went from there. The hijackings along Highway 101 continued for weeks before anyone outside San Fernando even knew they were happening. Bus companies never stopped running the route and never warned the passengers. Local police were no help either, because more than half of them were later arrested for working with the Zetas the entire time. Adolfo Constanzo, the narco cult killer. It's a Friday night in Matamoros, a border town sitting right across the Rio Grande from Brownsville, Texas. Bars are packed with American college students on spring break, and 21-year-old Mark Kilroy is drinking with his friends. At some point, he steps out and disappears. His friends assume he wandered off for some air. They don't know that he's been abducted. The man who ordered the kidnapping, Adolfo Constanzo, was born in Miami in 1962 to a Cuban immigrant mother who introduced him early to Pablo Mayombe, an Afro-Caribbean religion that involves animal sacrifice and the use of human bones in spiritual rituals. In proper practice, human sacrifice is forbidden. Constanzo didn't care. By the mid-1980s, he had settled in Mexico City and built a following among wealthy drug lords, crooked cops, and anyone willing to pay for protection through his rituals. Posing as a fortune teller and spellcaster, he charged top dollar for ceremonies that promised safe drug shipments and immunity from arrest. And it worked. Well, not really. But every time a client avoided trouble, they credited him for it, feeding his reputation and his ego. At the heart of his rituals was something called anganga, a massive iron pot packed with animal remains, graveyard bones, and eventually, the body parts of people his followers murdered. Constanzo told everyone that the more human parts added to the anganga, the stronger the protection it would give them. In 1988, Constanzo moved to Rancho Santa Elena near Matamoros, a property owned by the Hernandez drug family. This became his murder playground. Victims included rival dealers, crooked cops, and anyone pulled off the street. When a powerful cartel, the Calzadas, refused him a partnership, 7 members disappeared. Their bodies turned up later, missing fingers, toes, ears, and brains. By March 1989, Constanzo decided he needed the brain of a white American male for his next ritual. With spring break in full swing, finding one was easy. Mark Kilroy just happened to be standing outside a bar at the wrong moment. Constanzo's men dragged him off, took him to the ranch, and killed him with a machete blow to the back of the neck. His brain was boiled in danganga, his legs were cut off, and a wire was threaded through his spine. Unlike his other victims, Kilroy's disappearance made headlines. His family applied pressure, and Mexican authorities launched a manhunt. When police arrested several Hernandez brothers on drug charges, one flipped. They led officers to Rancho Santa Elena, where they found 15 mutilated bodies, including Kilroy. Constanzo fled to Mexico City but couldn't cheat the end forever. In May 1989, police closed in on his apartment. Rather than face arrest, he ordered one of his own followers to shoot him. The follower did, and Constanzo died on the spot. That's it for today's Iceberg. The cartel world runs deeper than most people realize, and what we've covered here is only a fraction of what's been documented over the past few decades. Thousands of families across Mexico and Central America are still searching for answers that may never come. If you made it this far, make sure to like and subscribe for more icebergs like this.